All right, so I'm going to clean up our code a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the cat class because we don't need that at all. And I'm going to get rid of one of our dogs. And so I just have one dog instance. I don't need this cat class at all for what we're going to talk about next. Let me just save. We're going to refresh. We should just have one dog instance again. And we do. Now it's time to talk about a concept called encapsulation. What encapsulation is, it's a way of taking related code and structuring it, that you have kind of a package put together. Now we have these things called classes, and so what we're going to do is inside of a class, we're going to start to implement methods and properties that are related to that dog. And so, for example, dogs may have something called a name. So to create a property, first of all, is I'm going to put the keyword public, and then I'm just going to put the property name. So maybe a dog has a name, and we're going to finish off that line with a semicolon. And maybe a dog has an age. And again, we'll finish off that line with a semicolon. So now I have this dog that has a name and an age. And let's go ahead and refresh and see what I get here. And now you can see that this dog has this name property and then an age property. And these are both set to null because they haven't been set at all so far. And how I would set this name and this age is I would use my instance, dog1, and I could use a dereferencing operator to get into whatever's inside this class. And I'm going to set the name, and this one's going to be Fred. And I can set dog1 age equal to, let's say, 20. And now when I rerun this, so now you can see that I have a name, and it is of type string, and there's 4 characters in that string, and the name is Fred. And here you can see I have an age, and it's an integer, and the value is 20. Now one of the things that you see over here is the typing, and I really want to type all of my properties. How I do that is I put the type right before the variable name. So this is of type string, this is of type integer, and when I do that, nothing's really going to change over here. I refresh and you can see nothing's really changed, but what happens is things change down here. As an example, if I were to feed in a string here, let's just see what happens. And so what we're going to do is we're going to watch age here. When I refresh, nothing changed. And what happens is under the hood, PHP will do this thing called type juggling for you. And it will take this string instance and it will try to convert it to an integer. Then it will just happen under the hood. And so that's what's happened. It's taken this string value and it's converted it to an integer. What happens if I put in maybe a float, 12.5 years old, and I refresh? You can see again, it's done some type juggling, and it's converted my 12.5 float into an integer of just 12. Now I've lost some data in this case. If I really need this to be a float, then I should declare this as a float. And then when I refresh the page, now you can see I'm getting the full 12.5. So it's important to type your properties so that the users understand how to use your class. This public keyword means that this particular property is accessible to the user. So when I'm programming against your class, I can access that property using this dereferencing notation and then access the variable. There's another property called private, and I'm going to create an integer. Let's say that this integer is going to represent how much food is in the belly of our dog. So let's just say food in belly. And when I create these instances, I can also set their initial value. So if I want, I can set this to 5, and then I'm going to refresh our page and what we'll see over here. And then what we're going to see over here now is it indicates that there is this property called food in the belly on the dog class, but it's marked as private. And it has a value of 5. And by marking something as public, that means it's accessible by the outside. You can access it. And private means you can't access it. So down here, if I were to attempt to access that, first of all, my IDE doesn't list it. It's not available there. But let's just type it in and see if we can get in there and set this to maybe 10. My IDE is complaining. It's saying, hey, this member has a private visibility. And if you really want to access it, it's telling me to go up and make it public. But I'm not going to do that. Let's just refresh and see what we get. And now we're getting this fatal error. It says cannot access private property. So PHP is enforcing these access keywords, whether something's public or whether something's private. I'm going to get rid of this so we have a functioning code again. Next thing is let's write some methods. So let's start off simple. We know dogs bark or they speak. So let's go ahead and we're going to use our accessor. So we're going to use the public keyword, and I'm going to use the keyword function to let it know that I'm creating one of these methods. The next thing is I need the method name, and we're going to call this speak. And after that, I have a little code block where I can implement the speak method. This little bit right here is just a function, but now it's inside of a class. And when it's inside of a class, we call that a method. Now for this speak method, let's just make this super simple right now. We're going to say echo, and then maybe it's woof, woof, just like that. So now I have this method. It's called speak. Let's go ahead and try this on our dog. So I can come down here and I can have my dog speak. And let's refresh and see what I get. And you can see up here at the very top it says woof woof, and then it prints out the dog instance. Now maybe in the future, maybe I'm going to have multiple dogs. I want to know which dog is speaking. So each dog has a name, and we can echo that out. So if I want to access this name, you can't just access the name like this, and then we use our concatenation operator and then maybe a colon and say woof woof. So this is the name, woof woof. If I access this way, my IDE is already telling me I'm going to get an error. It's undefined because the scope here, this variable name, it's trying to find it inside of this method called speak, but it doesn't exist in here. If I run this, we'll get an error. It's important to see these errors sometimes. Undefined variable name. All right, so we know that this doesn't work here. Before I show you how to fix this, I want to do an experiment here. We have this function up here called dump. So I'm going to dump a variable called this. Now, you might be wondering, what is this? And after I dump it, let's talk about what it means here. And you can see the dump is right above where it says echo name. So it's right above this warning. And what we're getting is the object itself. So if you look here, it's object number 1, which is the dog, and it's the same thing that I'm getting down here. When you're inside of a method, if you want to access the object that is currently instantiated, you can use this variable. And so if that makes sense, I'm going to get rid of the dump statement, and instead of accessing name directly, I can access first the object that I'm dealing with, which is the $ this variable, and I can use the dereferencing operator, just like down here. I dereferenced it and I got name. This code is exactly the same thing, but I don't want to hard code it to a specific instance. Whatever instance that speak is being called on, that's the one you want to use for dereferencing. So let's save this, run it, and our error went away, and now you can see Fred says woof woof. In fact, I like it like that. Let's say Fred says woof woof. We run it again. Fred says woof woof. And just to keep everything a little more spacey, let's go ahead and add another BR. I think that'll help us in the long run. Fred says woof woof. Now I can have logic inside of this method. So for example, we have this food in belly, and we set this to 5. So 0 means that it's hungry, let's say, and 5 is full. All right, so 0 is hungry, 5 is full. So here I can have some logic. I can say if, and again, if I want to access this food in the belly property, I have to use the variable called this. That's the instance that I'm dealing with. And then I can access the property, food in the belly. Let's say it's equal to 0. In that case, our dog isn't going to say woof woof, but maybe it says, I don't know, whimper whimper. So now it's saying it's hungry. Else, we can finish this off with an else statement. It'll do its normal woof woof. All right, so now I have a speak method that has a little bit of logic in it, and it's using properties that are inside of the class. This food in the belly property is marked as private. What that means again is it's private to this class. Inside of this class, this method here, I can access that food in the belly property and see if it's set to 0. If it is, we're going to say whimper whimper. Now right now we instantiate it as 5. If I refresh, I should get the same thing over here. It should say Fred says woof woof, and we do get that. But if I set this to 0, now you can say Fred says whimper whimper. Okay, so let's do one more thing here. So I have a public method. Let's introduce a private method, something that's only accessible inside the class. Here I have a bit of logic, and this logic really is determining if this dog is hungry or not. But let's encapsulate that logic into a method, a private method, so it's only accessible inside. We're going to call it isHungry. And this particular method is going to return a Boolean. And we're just going to put this logic in here. Just like that. And by the way, this method right here, it's giving me a little squiggly. It doesn't return anything, so it's a void method. Here, instead of using our property, accessing our property, that's accessed by this method. And maybe in the future, this isHungry method can be a little bit more complex. So I can put all the logic to determine if our dog is hungry right inside this method. But here, I can access that private method by calling isHungry, just like that. So now I have a public method that is accessible outside, and this method's calling a private method that's only accessible inside. And down here we can see if I try to access the dog again, you can see everything that's accessible that's public. If I were to try to say access isHungry again, and I run this, I'm going to get an exception that we see here, isHungry. It's a global scope, so I can't access this outside, but I can access it inside. So now when the speak method's called, it determines if it's hungry. It says whimper whimper if it is hungry. So right now it's set to 5, should be full, woof woof. If I set it to 0, this now should say whimper whimper, and it does. So just to recap now, we have a way of creating public and private properties, and we also understand how to create public and private methods. The other thing that we learned in this lesson is how to dereference or access the properties when we're inside of a class using the $this variable that's provided to us. And we see how to access these properties and methods that are public outside the class. We also learn how to create a new instance of a class, set properties, and call methods externally.